If you work as a manufacturing facilities engineer, installing a new piece of equipment can be as complex as the machinery itself. From prep work to alignment and testing, it's your team's job to put it all together. That's why it's good to have Grainger on your side. With industrial-grade products and next-day delivery, Grainger helps ensure you have everything you need close at hand through every step of the installation. Call 1-800-GRAINGER, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.
Cheers, Rockets fans. Welcome to The Logger Line, an exclusive podcast from the home of the Rockets.
Whoa!
Sports Talk 790.
Rockets!
The Logger Line is proudly served to you by Carbox Clutch City Lager.
It is good!
Oh, yeah? Red Nation, get ready. Get ready. The Logger Line starts now.
Welcome aboard. Welcome in to another new episode of The Logger Line, your source for analysis and commentary of all things Houston Rockets basketball. As always, I'm your host, Ben DuBose, editor of USA Today's Rockets Wire and a contributor to Sports Talk 790, the official flagship radio station of the team. Today, on this Sunday, July 2nd, the second day of NBA free agency during the 2023 offseason, I'm joined by my good friend, co-host, and producer out of Portugal, Paulo Alves. Paulo, this has been a whirlwind of a weekend. I think your emotional state in particular between Friday night when it initially looked free agency negotiations opened on Friday, June 30th at 5 p.m. Central. There were a few hours that it looked like the Rockets might lose Fred VanVleet, who was clearly their top target heading into free agency, one of three at the top of their list alongside Brook Lopez and Dillon Brooks, but Fred definitely the highest in terms of average annual value. There was a time period it looked like that Fred might spurn them and go back to Toronto. Then there was a time in which it looked like the Rockets got Fred, but it was at 3 years, which I know you were outraged about because of what it would mean for team building in the future. Then it came out that, no, it's not a 3-year deal. The deal had a team option, so it's really the 2-year deal that we talked about all along. Then I know Brook Lopez, your target, it looked late Friday or early Saturday like that the Rockets were going to get him and fill their need for a defensive big man who can shoot. Then it didn't happen. Then there were some curious trades apparently connected to that, offloading Usman Garuba, TyTy Washington to Atlanta, Josh Christopher to Memphis, KJ Martin to the Clippers, basically taking out a lot of young players who seem to be blocked, a bit of a log jam in terms of their development, and also to open up a bit more financial space that ultimately you didn't even need. That was a downer. The Rockets signed Dillon Brooks, who I know you had come around on, but the terms, $80 million for 4 years, no options, were a bit deflating. Then Saturday night, the Rockets signed Jeff Green, who I think is the ultimate glue guy, the type of veteran you want to add. I think it's fair to say your emotions have been all over the map in the last 36 to 48 hours, right?
Yeah, it's been a wild ride. The first free agency, like it started, right? And then it took a couple of hours until we got the Fred VanVleet deal. And so the tensions were building up. And then when it dropped and I looked at it and I'm like, no, we're not about to pay $45 million to Fred VanVleet when we have to pay Jalen and Sengun. And so I was going off on that one. But eventually, later that night, we found out that it's a team option, or there were rumors circulating that it was a team option, and that changes everything. To me, it never even crossed my mind that it could be a team option because it didn't make any sense. The growing sense that we got from reports was that for me the night, but for y'all the evening, maybe the afternoon, I don't know. As it developed, it looked like Fred VanVleet was closer and closer to joining the Raptors, and so what it looked like was that, well, he was going to join the Raptors and the Rockets had to do something. And so they overstepped their budget and they offered 3 years. And that's how they got him. And that made all the sense in the world. Nobody would have expected them to get a better deal than the one they were supposed to get in the first place, because all the rumors said the Rockets are going to give him 2 years, 80 million, right?
Right.
Adding a team option on top of that, that's a good thing for the team and the team alone. right? Because that gives the team more control. And in case Fred VanVleet's this perfect fit and there's no better alternatives, they can extend that contract for 1 year further. And so it never really made sense, which is why it was such a huge shock when it came through. And that to me turns the deal completely around, because Fred VanVleet is the perfect fit here. Leadership wise.
Hold on.
Yeah.
Would you say it turned the deal upside down?
Dude, for Jordan, when does he come back? We need the Jordan to come back and beat the Rangers. I mean,
God, unfortunately not for this series. My guess is on the other side of the All-Star break. So basically just one more week without him.
Especially against Eovaldi. He's the one that got us through him, right? That was my first series of playoff baseball that I ever watched.
Oh, damn, that's a great recall.
Yeah.
You're right.
So yeah, back to basketball. I think Fred VanVleet's a perfect fit, right? There was because of the comparisons whether they should have gone after James Harden instead, and just from a leadership perspective, right? He's a winner. He has won an NBA championship. He has been on countless successful teams. He took the reins after Kyle Lowry left. He's an enforcer. He's a great on-ball defender, which is something that we did need, and we got double it in Dillon Brooks as well. But most importantly, and this is a point that actually Roosh made last night on Rockets Watch, which is it's a lot. So if your point guard is a really good on-ball defender and an enforcer, and your small forward next to you is also a really good on-ball defender and an enforcer, and then the four is likely to be Jabari or Tari, two defensive-minded guys. If Jalen Green's not fighting through screens, if Jalen Green's not trying on defense, he's going to stick out like a third thumb. As opposed to last year where everybody was playing shit defense, and so you couldn't really pinpoint one person that was the reason. That really puts a lot more weight on Jalen Green's shoulders, and it makes it easier to figure out who the problem is. And if Jalen's the problem, then he's going to have to deal with the consequences, because it will be obvious that there will be no option for him to deflect the blame to, because it's on him. Every single perimeter defender on this team that's projected to start is going to be really good. So from that perspective, I really like Fred VanVleet as a prospect. He is a point guard. He has an elite assist to turnover ratio, which is something the Rockets need. He's not the most efficient, but as many have said, the Raptors' offense wasn't exactly the best. Nick Nurse is not exactly an offensive guru. When he won a championship, it was because, well, first of all, they had really smart bigs in Ibaka and Marc Gasol. But they also had Kawhi Leonard, who's going to make something happen out of nothing, and he's an offensive option by himself. To me, at 2 years, the Fred VanVleet deal is a home run. Perfect fit for this team. I expect his shooting numbers to be better with us. He's shooting has declined ever since like the 2022 All-Star break, which is a really short sample size for someone who's been a great shooter his entire career. On high volume, I expect the volume to decrease on a team with so many offensive options as the Rockets are. I expect him to get more catch-and-shoot shots. I expect him. One of the things that we lacked in this free agency, that I'll just go ahead and say, is we lacked shooting, and we only got one guy that's a respectable shooter, but that guy is Fred VanVleet. And I expect that when he doesn't have the ball in his hands, he will create space for others, because even if he shot 34% last season, he did it on 10 attempts the previous season. He is a respected shooter in the NBA. Teams are not going to leave him open. Teams are not going to sag off of him. So Jalen's not going to have any trouble or outprinting or any trouble spacing-wise. Because
by the way, quick rant that I want to throw in on that. It really bugs me when people on social media strictly judge shooting through percentages, because it's so asinine. Fred VanVleet is an elite shooter. Let's be blunt. I know the percentage last year was 34%, but come on, there's so many factors that go into it, between usage patterns, shot selection, injuries. For starters, with Fred, we have a much larger sample that he's going to shoot at a higher clip than that, and that last year was an outlier. But even within that context, there's so many factors that go into each person's number that I think in our world of social media, people want to boil it down to something just one size fits all that they can throw out there. I'll throw you two examples from recent Rockets history: Eric Gordon and KJ Martin. Over KJ Martin's first 2 years with the Rockets, he shot over 36% from three. Over Eric Gordon's 7 seasons with the Rockets, he shot 36% from three. If you think that makes them identical shooters, you are insane. Eric Gordon was an elite shooter. It came down to shot selection, the types of threes he was taking and needed to take given how he was used in that offense. Caitlin Cooper, who we had on the pod a couple of weeks ago, did a great article in late 2021 in 538 about the value of Eric Gordon's gravitational pull, referring to the fact that even beyond 27 feet, defenders still had to respect him. And of course, that meant a ton for the Rockets as far as their offense, the spacing, what it means for the other 4 players that are playing alongside him in those minutes. So I do think that people acting like Fred isn't a shooter simply because of last season's number. I'm sorry, that's way too simplistic. Fred VanVleet is an elite shooter in the NBA. And I also think, by the way, to your point on shooting, we'll see what they do the rest of the offseason. But I think and hope that assuming Kevin Porter Jr. sticks around, and it seems clear that they do value him on some level, that's why they didn't try to move him in any of these deals to create more salary cap space, then potentially you're moving KPJ into less of a creation and more of a secondary playmaking and shooting role. So I do think that some of the hope, we've seen the catch and shoot numbers for a couple of years now, but that in terms of the spacing, what you can do off ball, I think it's not just Fred, it's also moving KPJ into a bit more of a shooting role, which honestly is probably optimal for him anyway, when you look at his skill set. And so I think that's part of the shooting picture as well. So just want to clarify, number one, Fred's not a bad shooter at all. Anybody saying that based on last season's number is just fundamentally not being serious. And secondly, I do think there's some hope that Kevin in a different role can give you a bit more shooting value as it pertains to, the spacing for everybody else.
Yeah, that's a really good point because you're basically getting a different player in KPJ because you're changing his role so much.
Right.
And you're leaning into him as a shooter, which we know is elite, as long as it's not pulling up. I mean, even if it's pulling up, I think he hit like 36 or 37% last season. But yeah, I think that's a really good point as far as wing shooting goes, because he can play the wing.
Yeah, and by the way, I should point out that the converse of the Eric Gordon example, even when KJ Martin was shooting 36%, defenders still sagged off like crazy. They did not trust that jump shot, and ultimately, of course, in year 3, it reverted back to what people thought it would be entering the NBA, low 30s, I think just above 31%, and I do think it was a factor in why the Rockets ultimately moved him to the Clippers. So the larger point is that it's not just about that number; it's also much more about how those percentages and how their overall shooting profile makes other teams defend them and what that means for the offense when they're functionally on the court.
Yeah, I agree. And just to close the loop on Fred VanVleet, once again, he is overpaid for 2 years, but let's be honest, the Rockets are taking advantage of the fact that 6 of their core players that are going to be in the rotation, or at least 5 of them are going to be in the rotation, are on rookie deals. And they are on rookie deals for the next 2 years. So this is a window that they have to take advantage of, and that you don't mind overpaying for these 2 years because you're compensated for the market for the exploit that are rookie contracts, right? So for 2 years, I actually think that this is a home run deal. I think this is maybe an A+ deal because they got that team option that I don't expect them to pick up, but there are scenarios depending on how Jalen Green pans out or how Operation Moon pans out where they can pick it up. But that optionality is really important because if you're locked into it, now all of a sudden you're forced to trade and you're forced to give up assets to do so. So to me, this was great way to start. Well, not to start, but a couple of hours after it started. And the other angle I'd like to include is there was a report by Jake Fisher that I thought was really interesting. It was that both Gabe Vincent and Kyle, not Kyle Lowry, and Fred VanVleet consulted with Kyle Lowry to help them make that decision as far as free agency goes. Which I just as a fan, it makes me happy that I'm going to imagine that Kyle Lowry told Fred VanVleet that Houston was a good spot to go because Kyle Lowry played here, right? And so I like to imagine that played a factor into it. And I'd like to imagine that, listen, we might have not gotten Brook Lopez, and because of that, and because we had to overpay for Dillon Brooks, a lot of people are going to say, oh, this is what happens with every rebuilding team. Well, no, because even if you overpay, which is what the Rockets tried to do with Brook Lopez, guys can still not come. Fred VanVleet has been in Toronto for his entire career, his lifestyle.
Right.
The Toronto Raptors were interested in bringing him back. They put up a competitive offer. I'm fairly certain. I mean, they rumored to be giving him $30 million a year for 4 years, or even if you make it 3 years, it's a close enough offer to what the Rockets offered. And Fred VanVleet still chose to come here for more money. That's correct. But that makes me feel good about where this team's going. And then we'll get into all of the stuff that went wrong in a little bit. Do you want to move on to Brook Lopez or Dillon Brooks next?
Yeah, so let me try and set up what I think happened with those two deals. By the way, today's show, we're going to be all over the place. As always, this is the Logger Line, your source for everything Houston Rockets basketball, served to you courtesy of Clutch City Lager of Karbach Brewing, their beer developed in collaboration with the Rockets. Look, we're going to bounce around because I think a lot of this stuff is intertwined. We know going into free agency, they had 3 clear targets at the top of their list. From everything I've heard, the Kyle Kuzma smoke was just a red herring. I think that was his agent linking the Rockets for leverage purposes. Ultimately, he re-signed with the Wizards. Clearly for the Rockets, it was always, from my conversations and the way it played out, Fred VanVleet, Brook Lopez, and Dillon Brooks. They got 2 of the 3. Perhaps the Brooks contract is a little richer than people wanted. They didn't get Brook Lopez, and I think it's fair to question if they should have still gone through with some of the deals they did after Lopez spurned the Rockets. There's a lot of different angles, but before we go into the particulars of each deal, I want to explain why I think this played out as it did. Because one thing at like a 30,000 foot view that you need to understand about the Rafael Stone era of the Rockets, they are focused very much on relationships. And it is an enormous change from when Daryl Morey was leading the front office, especially about 10 years ago. I think Daryl softened it a little bit in his latter years as he saw where the NBA was going with the player empowerment era and players and agents having more power and needing to warm up to them. But I think especially early on in Daryl's tenure, the Rockets were very cutthroat. And that's when you started hearing all the feedback about players feel used, they feel like assets. Basically, the Rockets felt like they had such an organizational advantage, which they did. They were extremely smart as a front office. Also, some teams weren't really all in on analytics at that point. So it was a bit like the Oakland A's in Moneyball in the early 2000s. For anyone who's seen the movie, the A's were really good, even with insanely low payrolls, because they had so much of a fundamental competitive advantage in terms of their front office approach. What ended up happening, of course, is that it eroded over the years as more teams used those principles. And then it's like, well, of course, MLB does not have a salary cap, but it's like, well, if other teams are using the same principles and they have more money, then the competitive advantage that Oakland had when that movie was made in the peak Moneyball years ultimately went away. And so I think when you look at the Rockets over the last 10 to 15 years, they started off being super cutthroat at a time in which they had a lot more of an advantage in terms of they were one of the really smart front offices. There were also a ton of dumb front offices not using analytics at all. They could pick on, take advantage of. And so between that and the player empowerment era not being where it is today, then my strong suspicion is that the Rockets said, you know what, our advantage is enough that we're just going to do the best we can to put talent, to maximize the talent you can have on the floor and let the chips fall as they may in terms of how players feel about it. That they just trusted their process enough that it was going to be enough. I think now, and this sort of culminated in the Brook Lopez deal and some of the negotiations. Actually, it had to do with the Fred VanVleet deal as well. That's why I want to talk about it here. They are very much relationship focused. And I think there's a couple of reasons. For starters, the competitive advantage, as I mentioned, is eroding. There's fewer and fewer truly dumb teams in the NBA that you can just pick on. So it's not like the analytics heavy focus can work to the extent that it did. Even if you have the right people 10 to 15 years ago, your competitors are much smarter. And then secondly, the player empowerment era. Look, you just don't want to double cross many people in this league because it's increasingly a relationship oriented business. And so I think we've seen ever since Rafael Stone took the reins in 2020, and this is something I've heard in private conversations as well, they are very much a relationship focused organization. This is a clear priority for them. They follow through on their word for better or for worse. And this weekend, there were sometimes it was for the better and others that it was for worse. But I think that's the consistent theme. And they believe that that level of trust is important to creating not just a contender, but a sustainable contender where the players they have in place want to be here. And hopefully, it can work out, especially if the guys they draft internally, think your Amin Thompsons, your Cam Whitmores, Jabari Smith, Tari Eason, Jalen Green, Alperen Şengün, if some of these guys pan out as true building blocks, then yeah, there's always a challenge to retain them. And I think Rafael Stone and his front office having this player-friendly, agent-friendly approach, if it works out, it can be beneficial from the standpoint of keeping this group bought in and hopefully locked in for a long time. And so I think how this goes into their free agency negotiations, look, everyone cheats. Let's just be blunt about this. Conversations have been had for weeks behind the scenes in terms of putting financial parameters together for these deals. And the Rockets thought they had an understanding with their top 3 targets. Ultimately, they did with Fred and with Dillon. With Brook, Friday night, the Rockets believed he was coming, that he had given them reason to believe that he was. And ultimately, Saturday morning, he decided to circle back to the Bucks. They matched or came close to matching the offer, and he ended up going back. And I don't think it's an unforeseeable scenario. It's happened before. It's tough to pluck a player like that, a key contributor to a legit title contender. That's why when I did my free agency pod with Jackson Gatlin last week on Locked On Rockets, I predicted actually most of what had happened. I said, I think they get Fred and Dillon. I don't think they get Brook. I actually said they'd pivot to Clint Capella as a backup plan, to be determined if that happens. I'm sure talk about that in a little bit when we talk about where they could go from here. But I just always had a tough time seeing Lopez leave a legitimate contender like Milwaukee. That always screamed leverage to me, and there was always possibility that the Bucks could cave at the last minute and give him the type of deal that he wanted to keep that team together. It's not like the Raptors, who clearly as a team are not a contender anymore. They had maxed out. But as far as the approach, look, I think the Rockets had certain deals in place based on the contingency of, well, I shouldn't say based on a contingency, because again, they didn't think they'd need it. They trusted the word that these guys were coming. And so the Rockets had these deals set up otherwise, and they just said, you know what, word is everything. Let's just push through. It's not worth going back on. And especially when the reality is the young guys they sent out, guys like Usman Garuba, Josh Christopher, look, we'll get into it, but the odds are they're not going to be good NBA players anyway. So I think from the Rockets' perspective, since it's not anything that consequential to your long-term future, they said, you know what, we may as well honor our word and see what happens. But I think, again, it's not all bad. I do think with Fred, we were just talking about what he brings as a player. Look, I do believe the reports that came out Friday afternoon that the Raptors did give a 4th year when they met with him pretty much the second the clock turned to 5 p.m. Central and negotiations can start. They did make a larger bid at the last minute. They did offer a deal that, at least in terms of guaranteed money, was substantially more than what the Rockets offered. They did pull on at his heartstrings to try and get him to stay. And yet the Rockets and Rafael Stone were still able to close the deal on basically the terms they had negotiated. And the 3rd year, now it's a team option, is even more friendly to the team. By the way, in terms of this, building relationships, an example I think back to in late 2021, when the Rockets negotiated this non-playing arrangement with John Wall, Rich Paul actually went out of his way. That's Rich Paul, the CEO of Clutch Sports Group, probably the most influential agent in sports right now. He went out of his way to tell Shams Charania of The Athletic that the way the Rockets were handling things with John Wall, basically paying him not to play, allowing him to work out, staying in dialogue about what the next steps would be, was how he wanted Daryl Morey to handle the situation with Ben Simmons, which was a fairly similar standoff happening at the same time. And I thought that was so telling that new Rockets GM is being cited as an example for how old Rockets GM should be operating. And so I think it speaks to this emphasis that I was just describing that really Rafael Stone has put into place ever since he took the job in late 2020. But I also think that it's interesting that Rich Paul was the person to make that comp, because to spin it forward, who represents Fred VanVleet? Rich Paul. And so even after the Raptors came in at the last minute, offered that 4th year, pulled at his heartstrings, ultimately Fred not only honored the parameters that were in place with the Rockets, but he ended up giving them a little something extra with that third year as a team option that gives them even more control, as you were describing. That's the good. I think ultimately the Rockets built a relationship with Rich Paul, and it paid off in these Fred negotiations. Not just Rafael Stone, but new head coach Ime Udoka clearly prioritized Fred. I've been hearing nothing but good things about him for a month now. Love him or hate him, the Rockets absolutely believe in him. They see him as the ideal fit, the floor general for this team, at least for the next couple of years and perhaps beyond that, as they try and transition this young group back into relevancy and eventually towards title contention, like what we saw Fred do with the Raptors in 2019. That's the good. The bad is, of course, what happened with Lopez, and that sometimes if you're too trusting, people can take advantage of you. And I think Fred and his agent ultimately used the Rockets to get the deal from Milwaukee. I'll be interested to see if the Rockets push that angle. I suspect they won't because I went and looked it up. I'm blanking on the name, but the agent for Brook Lopez has a
It's
number of
Wasserman.
clients. Yeah,
It's from Wasserman, and his name is. Oh, I cannot believe I
but
just looked it
I
up.
looked it up on Real GM, and he has a number of clients. One of his clients, by the way, is Clint Capella.
I
So
noticed that too. That's crazy.
yeah, amazing how it works. But the point is, I highly doubt the Rockets want to air the dirty laundry because, again, I think from a philosophical level, this player agent friendly approach still very much applies. But I do think they feel a little bit burned. And ultimately, they chose after things went south. In theory, sure, they could have said, hey, Atlanta, this doesn't work for us anymore. We're paying a slight premium with Usman Garuba and TyTy Washington, two guys that were recent, well, late first round picks, but still first round picks, including a couple of seconds to offload them into salary cap space. Now the Rockets are getting a second back for taking on and rerouting Patty Mills, and of course they're getting 2 seconds for KJ Martin. So at the end of the day, the Rockets actually net a second round pick out of all of these dealings. But in terms of the actual agreement with Atlanta, yeah, they easily could have said, you know what, this deal was not great for us, but we felt we had to do it because we desperately needed that space. Now we don't really need that space, so we're going to go back. No, the Rockets ultimately chose not to do that because they value their word with players, with agents, and with other teams. They want to be seen as a trustworthy organization, and they ultimately think that that's going to pay dividends in the long run. Time will tell as to whether they're right. But for me, again, it's just very revealing about their organizational philosophy. And as with most things, there's pros and cons to every approach. I'm not saying that the Daryl Morey approach from 10 to 15 years ago, and even to an extent what we saw with the Ben Simmons standoff in Philadelphia is wrong. Again, ultimately, the Sixers got pretty good value, even though it looks like they're going to lose James Harden. They got pretty good value for Ben Simmons at the time for handling it the way they did. And obviously, Daryl's results in Houston speak for themselves. I'm not saying that, even though the Rockets are doing it differently now, I'm not saying the Morey approach was all bad. No, clearly there were merits, good things about it. And conversely, the Rockets now, look, we talked about the virtues, and I think certainly it played a role in them getting Fred, even when the Raptors were trying to pressure him at the last minute to stay. But then there are downsides too, and that, the Rockets were very trusting, didn't really seem to have that great of a backup plan in place when it came to the Brook Lopez role for a defensive minded big. And they're just sort of in this no man's land now, at least with that salary cap spot where they haven't really replaced it. And again, it's not anything like that devastating to the long-term future. Again, Brook Lopez is 35 years old. So he's the type of guy, unlike Fred, who theoretically could be around in 3-4 years when you think this team can truly contend. Brook Lopez was always going to be an extremely short-term bridge. So not getting him, it's not as if it's devastating to your long-term formula in any way. But it does seem like, at least for now, there's no backup plan, at least no direct backup plan. Now, who knows? None of these deals can be made official until July 6th when the moratorium ends. So there's things the Rockets can do with that salary slot over the next few days. They can potentially expand some of these trades. There's also the possibility that they could sort of roll over the space into 2024 when Kevin Porter Jr.'s contract could potentially, if they wanted to, come off the books. So you could perhaps have a bit of salary cap room next summer, not nearly to the extent you did this summer, but try and make a play on the market then when, at least as it stands now, the 2024 free agency market looks a lot better than 2023. Of course, some of those players are going to go off the boards when they sign extensions with their own teams. But the point is, at least for now, there was not a direct backup plan for Brook. And I think that's why a lot of fans are confused. Again, based on his age, I don't think it's anything crippling to the long-term future. But I think the Rockets ultimately put a lot of stock in his word, and it backfired. So for me, it's still a fairly successful free agency period. I think they pivoted well in terms of Jock Landale on a 4-year deal, but only the first year guaranteed. I actually thought that's an underrated quality move. He clearly had some moments in the playoffs. Phoenix and Monty Williams clearly trusted him when they felt that DeAndre Ayton was getting a bit too soft. And so I think he actually could be a decent buy low as far as a defensive guy to complement Alperen Şengün. Unlike Lopez, you won't be competing for starters minutes in terms of the hierarchy. Şengün would still be the guy, so that could work out. And you have a ton of team control over that contract. Jeff Green feels like an ideal vet. As far as Dillon Brooks, I know that 80 million. There's some sticker shock associated with that. The popular question is who were the Rockets bidding against? Again, what people do not realize about the free agency landscape now in the NBA is that every team or nearly every team has access to the mid-level exception, which is enormous. A mid-level exception now basically lets you offer 4 years, 55 million fully guaranteed. That's a lot of money. And the Rockets, for reasons we've discussed in the past, there's typically a loser tax you have to pay, a slight premium. So all Dillon Brooks and his reps needed was one team willing to throw their full MLE, even if he didn't have any cap room teams interested, which I don't know to be the case. All it would have taken is one team to offer their MLE, and the Rockets, probably given their situation, would have needed to bid 4 years for 60 or 65 to make the math work for Dillon to take a chance on this situation. And, 80 is still a little bit above that, but the delta is not nearly as big as I think some of the initial outrage and the sticker shock would lead you to believe. And maybe some of the slight bloat to $80 million is because the Rockets are getting him on a descending salary figure. Once they didn't need Brook Lopez, we know that, again, the cap space wasn't going to go be allocated this offseason as intended. So perhaps you give Dillon a bit more money on the front end, which the Rockets are doing, in exchange to get him on friendlier terms as you get to year 3 and year 4. Again, the descending salaries we know, courtesy of Adrian Wojnarowski of ESPN. We haven't seen the exact figures yet, but descending very similar to the Jae'Sean Tate deal. So perhaps you had to add a little bit of average annual value to get him to take a deal with that type of structure, which long-term is favorable to the team. But look, the bottom line is, for those asking who were they bidding against, again, the entire league, once you can offer 4 years, $55 million through the MLE, again, 4 years, 80 million is not dramatically different when you consider that context, especially with the Rockets having potentially that loser tax applied to them after 3 of the worst years in franchise history. So all in all, look, the Rockets are a better team now than they were a week ago. I think your starting 5 is going to be Fred, Jalen Green, Dillon, Jabari Smith, Alperen Şengün. Your bench is going to have guys like Tari Eason and Kevin Porter Jr. playing key roles. I think Amin Thompson starts out as your backup point guard. Hopefully Cam Whitmore can work his way into the mix at small forward. We'll see what happens as far as Jae'Sean Tate, Jock Landale, Jeff Green. Those guys can compete for spot minutes in the front court. But it's a better team than you had before. It's just not the perfect offseason. And so I think I would say, all in all, I give it a B minus. There were opportunities missed, certainly with Brook Lopez, and it's not fun to see young players go, especially if you're attaching assets, in this case, a couple of future second-round picks, to offload them when you don't fully use that space, at least not immediately anyway. But at the end of the day, I sort of understand how it came to be. And so I guess my mood on all of this is a little disappointed, but also fairly understanding if this is how it went down. And while the Rockets have not made their case yet, I'll be very interested to see how Rafael Stone approaches this when he's asked questions on the record by the media. But just in terms of reading the tea leaves, while it wasn't a perfect weekend, I sort of understand why it went down the way it did. And while I do think, you made the point on Twitter, Paolo, that it reduced their margin of error a little bit because they didn't fully maximize this cap space, this huge window of $60 million in flexibility that we've all talked about for a couple of years now. At the same time, look, it wasn't a total waste. They got 2 of their top targets. They continued to add with 2 true blue chips in the draft between Amin Thompson and Cam Whitmore. So again, there's absolutely ways this can work out. The margin of error is slightly reduced because at least as of now, the cap space has not been totally maximized in terms of what they could do with it. But at the end of the day, I'm also not outraged the way some are, because I do sort of understand how we got to this point. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Listen, I'm gonna be a little bit more negative. I'm not like all gloom and doom like people on Twitter are. I'm sort of somewhere in the middle. I'll start with the Brook Lopez stuff. Listen, if this was a case of they've been fostering agent relationships for a while, and they had Brook Lopez's word that he was coming, and then he turned around and he took our offer and took it to the Bucks and said, "Hey, Matt, let and I stay or I'm leaving." Listen, it sucks, right? I would call it a little bit naive to be, because even if you trust your word with everything, you should still have somewhat of a backup plan in place. And I believe they had. I believe maybe Jakob Poeltl was the backup plan, but he was signed by the time Brook Lopez made this decision. Maybe Clint Capella was the other backup plan, but in the in between time, Atlanta already got the cap relief they were looking for when they dealt John Collins. And maybe Clint Capella's price is not the same that it was when they first had it as a backup plan a week ago. So I can understand why it happened. I still think that it's their job to be able to bounce back from a situation like that and make decisions on the fly to correct what went wrong. And they to some extent did, but I still think it was underwhelming.
And maybe they do more over the next few days, again, because it's not like it's gone until the moratorium.
Yeah, it's not over. Bimathek on Twitter had made the currently the numbers, and if they are able to move Jason Tate somewhere in this sign and trade deal for Dillon Brooks, whether it is Memphis or a third team for free, and Patty Mills, who is already expected to be moved, then they can get and if they can shift the Jock Landale deal from a free agency deal for 4 years with only one guarantee to a room exception deal that's only 3 years. So it's actually a better deal for Jock because he's giving up one less year of team control. They can get up to, I think, 21 million. Right, so they can still bring in Capella. They can still go after a guy like Miles Turner, which were the two names that they were tied to. They can still try and go get a defensive big to play with Alperen Şengün, or to be the backup to Alperen Şengün, or to fight for starter minutes. In the in-between time, they got Jock Landale, who I think is an okay backup option. Right, I don't think ideally he's the guy you bring off the bench, but he's good enough to do that. He's also, to me, if he took the deal that he took, he's also okay, or he doesn't have to be okay. He's under contract with our team control, but it's not out of the realm of possibility to, if you bring in someone better than him, that he just doesn't get minutes until someone gets hurt. Because I mean, he got $8 million a year, right? $8 million year one, and then he got all of that team control. I don't think he would have gotten that the $8 million in 1 year anywhere else. He might have gotten over a longer deal, but that's that. So I think it's not over yet. They can still correct it, and that's what I'm trying. That's what I've been saying on Twitter. That's what I want to see. They got punched in the gut by Brook Lopez. They got betrayed. That's what happened. Now they've got to get back up and go fight again and go try and get someone to fill the role that they wanted Brook Lopez to do.
Or if you do want to potentially roll over the space, start telling the fan base that. Again, there is some merits in saying, we're not in love with our options this summer. So with that slot that clearly, even if they don't want to say the name on the record, we know it was earmarked for Brook Lopez. If part of the plan is to sign guys that will do super contract-friendly deals like Jock Landale and sort of retain some optionality going into the 2024 offseason, where as of now the free agency class is a lot better. You could have Kevin Porter Jr. roll off the books if you want. Then come out and say that. Just tell the fan base. And again, maybe some of this is resolved the next few days. We haven't had any official comments yet, but tell the fan base what the plan is, because it would be a lot easier to sort of get on board with it if it felt like that, that there was a potential backup plan that everyone could get on board with.
Yeah, and it's also nothing that I'll mention. They can get that. So the way they can get that 21 million cap space number this year is because they will involve Jason Tate and Patty Mills into a sign and trade, and so they will submit that sign and trade after they spend the cap space in that sign and trade. Since it's a trade into cap space, we'll take them over the cap once they're right up against it, right? And so which means that taking this space into the trade deadline is not an option. It is an option to take it into next season, because by next season you can get rid of Jock because he's not guaranteed if you want to, and Jeff Green expires, right? And so you can open up the space again next year. Combine that with salary cap going up. But there's no point in leaving the space up and not using the space. At least if you can get an expiring deal there at the very least, it would make sense, just even if it's for free or if it's a salary dump or something. But I will say, so the Brook Lopez situation, I understand what happened. I'm still disappointed because, as I said, I do think it's their job to adapt, and they still have a couple more days or until the end of moratorium to do so. And I think they somewhat did, right? Jock Landale, to me, strikes me as a product of them adapting on the fly. It's just not what people expected, especially when the timing is
a little underwhelming.
Yeah, and the timing wasn't great either, because you built up a lot of tension with that Atlanta Hawks deal, which looked awful, and I'll get into it. Because all of a sudden, you had $26 million available, and you made the deal, or you gave up two past first round picks, who are obviously not worth a first round pick right now, to create
we spent the whole afternoon talking about, could they expand it to get Clint Capella? We talked about them being able, with up to $30 million in flexibility, could you get someone like DeAndre Ayton? Like, just based on the way it went down, we were talking about these like top 10 centers, at least in terms of salary, big names that everybody recognizes. And then it's like, oh, Jock Landale, even though he's actually a pretty promising young big going into his third season. Again, just the way it went down from a PR perspective was especially tough.
Yeah, because, as I said, you don't make, so looking at it from the outside, you don't make a deal like the one they did with Atlanta, where they're just generating $5 million, unless you have something else down the pipeline. And so people expected that to happen, because it just made no sense in a vacuum. And so the expectation was really high. And when you hear that it's just Patty Mills and Jock Landale, it all comes crashing down. And then you finish that up with that huge Dillon Brooks contract, and people are just, completely heartbroken just because of the way the moves were ordered. And the Fred VanVleet team option kind of softens the blow a little bit that the news came out at the same time. But the expectations
that was convenient, by the way.
Yeah.
Very convenient. Wink.
The expectations were just too high. And I think it's interesting, the timing of they waited a day to release the information on the team option. You just mentioned the relationships with agents. I think that was something that was to foster a better relationship with Clutch as well. Clutch got the first 24 hours where everybody's paying attention to the deal. During those first 24 hours, everybody thought, hey, Fred VanVleet just got a steal, like, not a steal, but he got a huge deal, the best deal ever for an unrestricted free agent. And, Clutch looks really good. But then when you actually strip it down and you take all the hype out, the Rockets actually came away with a better deal than they even expected in the first place, and which is what matters to them, right? We can care about public opinion of the team, we can care about public opinion of the GM, but public opinion is a lot more important to the agent than it is to the team, because the team only cares about, at the end of the day, getting the best contract possible, even if everybody thinks they're needed. As long as they got the contract that they wanted, that's what matters. And so I think it was convenient that they spent the 24 hours without saying that, and then eventually the news came out after nobody was talking about the deal anymore, kind of as a footnote on the entire free agency thing. I would actually guess that a lot of casual NBA fans don't know that that's a team option still, and it doesn't matter, because it's not about whether they know or not. Their opinion matters a lot more to someone that's an agent than to a team. I will say, though, the TyTy Washington and Usman Garuba deal, right? We've got to talk about it, because the only way, so back when it happened, I thought something has to be imminent, and they overpaid on dumping these salaries because they need the deal to get done now, and they're afraid that the deal may fall through if they take too long. But then I started connecting the dots, and Usman Garuba tweeted out the two eyes, the eyes emoji, a couple of days back, which makes me think that the deal was already in place. And now you're saying that deal was already in place with Atlanta. And it made sense if they got Brook Lopez, but doesn't really make sense anymore now that they didn't. But they already had given their word and they wanted to stand by it. That makes sense to me. Doesn't change the fact that it's horrible value. Joe Harris, a $19 million salary, who hasn't played more than half the games in the season in like 2 or 3 years, is not athletic, is on the wrong side of 30, right? A $19 million expiring salary dump cost 2 second-round picks.
Yeah.
The Rockets dumped $5 million worth of salaries, both expiring. We're forgetting that they're young players. Let's just throw that out of the way. It's a big part of the deal, but let's just throw that out of the way. From a market value standpoint, 2 second-round picks to dump $5 million is not good value. And
yeah, well, I think the more appropriate parallel. So I think the Harris deal with the Nets and Pistons was a bit of an outlier, and maybe the Pistons still see some value in him as a shooter, because I was stunned by that as a valuation. I don't think that's typically what an expiring salary dump would go for. I think that's sort of an extreme example of the other parallel. But I do think, the more appropriate would actually be from the same web of transactions with the Rockets for them taking on Patty Mills, who's an expiring salary at 6 point something, basically the same general ballpark as Garuba and TyTy, who were recent first-round picks, and so I'm sure you'll get into that as well. But Mills in the same ballpark, the Rockets got 1 second-round pick for taking him on, as opposed to Atlanta getting those two. Again, the value is a little out of whack. What I think happened, to sort of peel back the curtain, it's a little bit like the scenario where, the Thunder, this is a huge example, but the Thunder did the Paul George trade when to the Clippers, they were not just getting Paul George, but Kawhi as well. So they were willing to overpay because they felt like they had them over a barrel. I think from the Rockets standpoint, because they were so close to going 3 for 3 and having a perfect offseason relative to expectations, then Atlanta sort of had them over a barrel, knowing that Houston desperately needed this space to make the math work for all three of VanVleet, Brook Lopez, and Dillon Brooks. And Houston said, okay, we'll pay a slight premium because at the end of the day, they don't really believe in these guys anyway. And it's not like second-round picks are that big in the grand scheme. But then it feels especially horrible when you do that and then you don't get Brook Lopez anyway. So it's like, well, why did you follow through on it?
Yeah, I just have a tough time believing that no other team in the NBA would have just taken them for free. I understand that, and if they were taking care of it in a rush, I can understand it. But it's really tough for me to believe that a team like the Spurs or a team like Portland, who's just going through a rebuild, or a team like any other team that's rebuilding that doesn't have, 15 roster spots filled with young guys like the Rockets had. I just struggle to believe that nobody would take them for free, that you actually had to add second-round picks on top of it. And especially the second-round picks that they added aren't even the 2024 ones, where they already have 4 and they're going to lose value on them if the longer they take to deal some of them. So including that, to me, it's even tougher. I think that deal is. I don't think there's a way to spin that deal in a way that's positive. It was just a matter of, hey, they had a deal agreed upon on a completely different outlook of an offseason, and they didn't want to, go back on their word just because Brook Lopez went back on their word. Whether that's the correct decision or not, I don't know. I don't know what I would have done.
And by the way, another interesting thing about that deal that I think we need to talk about, they easily could have kept all 3 of the young guys, Garuba, TyTy, and Josh Christopher, who went to Memphis in a separate deal. Well, it looks like it'll all be one deal at the end of the day, but in terms of the agreements, the way it was reached, they could have kept all 3 of those guys and traded Jae'Sean Tate and opened up pretty much the identical salary slot, and they chose not to. I sort of understand, I guess, if you don't believe in these guys and there's a bit of a roster logjam already, how are they going to play, or how are they going to develop if they don't play? That's a fair consideration. But at the end of the day, I also don't know how Jae'Sean Tate's going to play, because you look at the front court, your starters are going to be Dillon Brooks at the 3, Jabari Smith or Tari Eason at the 4, and Alperen Şengün at the 5, and then your bench, whoever doesn't start between Eason and Jabari, you're going to need to play Cam Whitmore at least a few minutes, and increasingly more, you hope. You're going to have Jock, Landale, Jeff Green as far as backup bigs. There's somebody else I'm forgetting. I'm sure you'll throw KPJ into the small forward mix as well, since you're going to be using him more as a shooter, as we described earlier. So you already have a lot of depth and pieces that need to play. So you sort of kept, clearly the Rockets, again, they basically chose Jae'Sean Tate over all 3 of those young guys combined, which I guess you can make the argument for, because at least Tate has shown at the NBA level that he can be a functional rotation quality player. None of those other 3 have. but then you're keeping him, and I still don't exactly know where his minutes are going to come from. So it's very interesting to me that this is the route. Clearly they're making a bet on Tate, and yet I'm not even sure where the minutes come from. Am I missing anything?
I think there's two things that it could be. It could be that they think that it's easier to move in the sign and trade.
Maybe
that may do now, and it could just be that for some reason they want the roster spots. It's 3 versus 1, but that would imply that some other deal's coming or some other free agency signings are coming. And assuming that they had a deal agreed upon before, maybe they already had Jeff Green and Jock Landale lined up. I don't know, but maybe it's tough to figure it out. But it could be a roster spot thing because as we know, we have the six main young guys. We have 2 new free agents that were already going to come. You had Brook Lopez on top of that. That's 9. You had KJ Martin, who you eventually dealt, and then you have Jae'Sean Tate. I'm not sure why it would warrant that. I don't think it's a roster spot thing. Not thinking about it because you have 20 roster spots until the beginning of the season.
Right.
And you could have just
you have time. And we've seen them do this before. They've had super big rosters in the offseason during the Rafael Stone era. So I don't think it's really that.
It's not roster spots. Well, I don't know. But as I said, I think it was just terrible value. And in the grand scheme of things, right, probably in 5 years we'll look at this, and it's unlikely that TyTy will be an NBA player. It's unlikely that Usman Garuba is going to be an NBA player. It's unlikely that Josh Christopher is going to be an NBA player in 5 or 6 years because late first round picks rarely pan out. At the same time, they are valuable. Late first round picks are valuable for a reason because even though the most likely outcome is that if they don't turn into anything, there is the chance that they do, and for that opportunity, you pay whatever it is, even if it's a second round pick for each. Now that they've been drafted.
Well, and I think what this underscores is that that's basically 4 late first to, I suppose, second round assets if we throw in KJ Martin. Now, individually, I think the KJ Martin deal was fine. Getting 2 second round picks, I never bought in, given his contract situation and everything else, that the Rockets were going to be able to get a first for KJ Martin. I just didn't think it was realistic. So I'm okay with that in a vacuum. But at the end of the day, the combination of the moves, the puzzle as a whole, look, you traded out KJ Martin, Josh Christopher, Usman Garuba, TyTy Washington, and you basically netted 1 second round pick. So for the most part, it feels like those players were basically just thrown away, and thus the asset involved to get them, in the case of 3 of the 4, a late first round pick, went just completely unspent. It's like you forfeited it. I do think that, again, it's important to underscore the expectations are fairly low at that slot anyway, but it's about the totality. Yeah, any individual first round pick in the 20s, the odds are more likely than not the player's not going to be good. But if you have 3 or 4 chances, it does ultimately hurt you if you can't make any of them turn into a rotation caliber player for you. And I think it goes back to the broader theme that you brought up earlier, Paulo. The margin of error is a bit reduced. I'm not saying that this is a fireable offense. Rafael Stone just made a mess of this and he needs to be gone today, that this is inexcusable. No, not saying that at all. Because in the grand scheme, you look at the Rafael Stone draft history. So ultimately what he's going to be judged by most are the picks at the top of the draft and how they pan out. Jalen Green, Jabari Smith Jr., Amin Thompson. It's still way too early to have much of an indication on any of those and whether the choices are going to age well or not. In the middle of the first round, I think he's actually done amazing work. Alperen Sengun, Tari Eason, Cam Whitmore. That's outkicking your coverage in a big way when it comes to expected return at those draft slots. So there is a little bit of a buffer from that, and that, you can have some misses late in the first round, in the second round, if you're substantially outkicking your coverage with guys like Sengun and Eason and Whitmore in the mid first. That's absolutely a fair argument to make. But I also think that by wasting, and that's effectively what's happened with discarding all of these young guys and basically saying we don't believe in any of them. I mean, that's the high level takeaway. The Rockets are saying, yeah, we think these guys aren't going to work out. It reduces your margin of error because those are guys that, at least in theory, you have as an option to maybe develop into a rotation caliber player or more down the line. And it's an asset that ultimately went unused that didn't pan out, or in this case, a combination of assets. It's the same way with the salary cap room. When we talk about it, they only signed 2 of the 3, the big 3 targets being Fred, Brook, and Dillon. If you only get 2 of the 3, then what happens with that other salary slot that was earmarked for Brook Lopez? Maybe they can do something in this window leading up to the moratorium ending on July 6th. Maybe you roll over the space and it can become something down the line in a trade or next offseason in 2024 free agency. But again, if it doesn't happen, then you're decreasing your overall margin. Now, that's not devastating. Again, like, they've gotten the bigger picture decisions right. And ultimately, if 2 or 3 of what I would consider the core 6, Jalen, Şengün, Jabari, Tari, and now Thompson and Whitmore, if even 2 or 3 of those 6 turn out to be the best or second best type player on a good team, then you're going to be cooking with gas. You're going to be in a great spot long term. But if that doesn't happen, then these little things like the Atlanta trade, like the combination of everything that went down over this weekend and with free agency, it just reduces the outs you have to prepare for other scenarios. I guess that's the way I would look at it. It's not indefensible. It's not like any of these moves are just depressing and franchise crippling. No, you can absolutely still be fine in the big picture, and more than fine if some of these young prospects really pan out the way you hope. It's just overall, it's a consistent theme of not maximizing your return at the margins, and potentially, that could have some effects in the years ahead.
Yeah, that's exactly my point, right? To me, the outlook of the team for next year is basically the same. You lost on Brook Lopez, which is a big loss. You got Jock Landale instead, and Şengün and we were going to be overpowered at the center position because you'd have 2 starting level guys, and now you only have 1. And you have a backup level guy as a backup. They have the opportunity, if they go after Clint Capella or Miles Turner or even Daniel Gafford of the Wizards, who are rebuilding, so he may be available, you have the ability to go get a defensive big, because that's what Udoka wanted. Jock Landale is okay, but it's not that. The overall outlook for next season is basically the same. What you did is you lost, 3 young guys that could have been used to grease the wheels in a bigger trade if you ever needed to. You lost KJ Martin, but that was largely expected. Listen, the KJ Martin deal, 2 second-round picks, not a lot, right? They can say all they want that they had a first. They didn't have a first. That's what every team says. When a player can be conceivably overpaid for with a first-round pick, every team says they have a first-round pick for them. Victor Oladipo's the prime example of that. Eric Gordon eventually got a first-round pick value, but I will bet you for the longest time didn't have a first-round pick that they found suitable enough, and they said that they did. That's a leverage play. I think the KJ Martin deal is okay, right? People love KJ Martin. Truth is, he was not a good defender last year. He is not a good floor spacer. He's an excellent cutter, and he's a guy who has a great feel for the game offensively, off the ball. But let's be honest, dude has 1 more year on his deal, and it is going to be an unrestricted free agency. And whatever team gets him now is likely wanting to get him because of his really cheap deal this year. But then, which means that next year they won't be as available to pay him what he wants to stay. And so this could very well be a rental. And it's not only that, the Rockets are in a position where they have no leverage, and they were always going to have no leverage on these guys because they have 6 top 10 worthy first-round picks on the roster. They have 3 vets coming, 2 big-time vets coming in, and the wing, the position KJ Martin plays, is overcrowded. Teams look at the Rockets roster and they know, hey, you're not going to be able to play KJ Martin, so I don't need to pay full value because you want to get rid of him anyways. And if you don't, and you keep him on the roster and he doesn't play, he's always going to be even lower, and you'll have even less leverage at the deadline. So that was largely expected, but from an overall point of view, I'll touch a little bit on Dillon Brooks as well before we move on.
Yeah,
it's an overpay, right? I didn't want Dillon Brooks in the first place. I was okay with Dillon Brooks for 2 years. I didn't want him for 4 years, but they did get the contract to be descending, which means, as I said before, the next 2 years they're basically playing on. I'll call it not borrowed time, but I'll call it borrowed money, right? Because as I said, first-round picks are comprising 70% of the rotation, and so you can afford to overpay other guys to fill roles and to go for the best talent, even if you have to overpay, as long as it's a short-term deal. So for the next 2 years, it's basically as long as Dillon Brooks doesn't get into a Christian Wood type situation where he thinks he's the man, and it would actually be better to not have him than to have him at all. Unless he becomes like a net negative for the team, it doesn't matter. If he does, it's going to be borderline impossible to move him, and they might just send him home if he's that big of a nuisance, because nobody's trading for this contract in the first 2 years. It's a given, unless he overperforms, at which point you don't want to trade that contract. And then after that, by the time we have to pay Jalen Green and Alperen Şengün, this isn't the same thing as Fred VanVleet, because Fred VanVleet was going to make $45 million in that year. That completely cripples you.
Yeah, a contract that's in the high teens in that environment when the NBA is getting its new TV deal and the salary cap is exploding. Come on. Like,
it's not.
Salman Ali of Red Nation Hoops had a good breakdown this morning of how by a percentage of the cap, Dillon Brooks' contract is fairly analogous to when they signed Trevor Ariza in 2014 as a backup plan to, Chandler Parsons and Chris Bosh. And he plays a somewhat similar role as well. We'll see how Dillon Brooks functions as a player, but as a percentage of the cap, especially with the descending salaries, and we're talking about high teens when the cap is exploding, the new TV deal, all the revenues that come with that, come on, it's not that bad.
Yeah, especially so because of what you just said, because of the descending deal. I think Nathan Fogg was who made the calculations on this. According to projected cap space, which I don't think includes, or projected salary cap, which I don't think includes the new TV deal yet, because we don't know how much that's going to be. Even with cap smooth, like people say, oh, it's not going to be a big deal because of cap smoothing. Well, even with cap smoothing, it makes it so it's not a 20 million jump, but it'll still be a 15 million jump instead of a 10 million jump, which is the norm. So, with cap smoothing, it's still going to be a...
And it is a big bet in his overall character. I mean, if he flames out altogether, then yeah, that's still significant.
Yeah. And so by the time you are going to pay Jalen Green, he's going to be making $19 and then $18 million a year, roughly. We don't know the exact numbers, but it'll be about that. It will start at like 22 and it will go down to 18. And at that time, it will be roughly 13% of the cap, which is what Robert Covington made when he signed this deal or when he was with us. It's, I still don't support a long-term commitment because I don't rate Dillon Brooks that much.
Right.
But they clearly do, and hopefully they are right. And it's one of those situations where, hey, they're the ones making the decisions, not us. They're the ones who have their asses on the line. They should go for the guys that they believe are better. And I'd love to sit here and I will tell you that I would rather have thrown that money at Bruce Brown, who got a worse deal than that.
Basically,
but if deal. Yeah, if they believe Dillon Brooks is better than Bruce Brown, and if Ime Udoka believes that he can get him to play the role that he should play to be successful, then at that point we just have to trust it and hold him accountable if it doesn't.
Yeah, and by the way, on the subject of holding them accountable, one narrative I'm getting really annoyed by on Twitter, this is getting so old, as whenever anything goes right from the perspective of fan expectations and desires, it gets attributed to Ime Udoka because, of course, there's a halo effect around the new coach that most people are excited about. And whenever anything goes wrong, it's put exclusively at the feet of Rafael Stone, when in reality, it's a partnership. Look, I'm going to be blunt. People attributed a lot of the Dillon deal to Rafael Stone, but Udoka had a huge part in that as well. He fits the defensive culture that the Rockets want to set now that he is in place. The rumors about the Rockets and Brooks, it started, shortly after Memphis exited the playoffs in the first round, and the Grizzlies basically said that they didn't want him back. But that was also right around the same time that the Rockets hired Ime Udoka as their head coach. So for people attributing, and I do think it's fair to say that Udoka played a role in the Rockets pivoting from James Harden to Fred VanVleet because they think Fred is a better fit both offensively and defensively and in the locker room with how they want to develop their young guys. Yes, Udoka had a role in that. I believe that. And there's a lot of people that are anti-James Harden. I think, as I've said in the past, a lot of that is overly emotional, but whatever the reason, people are anti-James Harden by and large. And so when the Rockets made this pivot to Fred VanVleet, and I think most of the fan base is on board with Fred, especially after we now know the third year is a team option, then everything gets credited to Ime. Look, as far as the Brooks deal, I'm not going to say it's all Ime, but he is very much on board. Clearly, he believes that this is a guy who fits the culture, the type of hard-nosed, tough defense that he wants to instill. And so this is his bet as well. I'm not guaranteeing that it's going to work out, But I do think there's just a little bit of sort of oversimplifying when it comes to, oh, if it's bad, then it must be Rafael. If it's good, it must be Ime. No, this is a partnership. For better or for worse, they're all in this together. And, you can throw ownership in that bucket as well. Between the Fertittas, between Rafael Stone, between Ime Udoka, this is an aligned team. They talked about that alignment for months, really ever since they hired Ime in late April. And so it's not just one of them. It's all of them collectively that, for better or for worse, we need to be analyzing, when we go into the pros and cons of these decisions.
Yeah, I agree. And so moving on, I think the only reason that makes me a little bit, even lower on Dillon Brooks especially is because it's a big commitment and likely it will be a good contract by the last 2 years. And they overpaid a little bit to get that contract to be good the last few years. The only thing that makes
it tough. By the way, I do want to emphasize one more time, as far as the 4 fully guaranteed years, I think one distinction between Dillon and Fred, I'm sure some are saying, look, I mean, Fred is clearly the higher priority target. How were you able to get him for only 2 guaranteed years and Dillon for 4? Look, Dillon is 27. So you can say, at least from a basketball standpoint, he should be in his prime for all 4 years, as opposed to Fred being 29. Once you get past 31 and he's a slightly undersized point guard at 6'1", there's some questions with how he's going to age. So ultimately, I think, number one, the Rockets gave Fred more of a bloat in terms of the max salary the first couple of years. And secondly, there is some risk. I'm sure Fred and his agent, Rich Paul, have to understand that teams have to take it into account given the age, year 3 and year 4. Dillon, there were fewer headwinds, at least in terms of age, which is why I think he had the leverage to get a 4-year deal. And also, even if we're talking 4 years, $55 million, again, all it really took or would have required is one team being willing to offer its 4-year MLE. And all of a sudden, the Rockets at a bare minimum probably have to bid 4 for 60, 4 for 65 if they want to get it. So while it's a little bit of an overpay, I don't think it's as drastic as a lot of people made it initially seem.
Yeah, it's just a big commitment, and then it's not so much about the AAV per se. It's about the number of years, and the
no options.
The no options. It kind of offsets with what I'm about to say, right? Because the contract being long term hurts you if it's a really large contract like Fred VanVleet. This is a role player. This is role player money, right?
Right.
Dillon Brooks might not be that level of role player to earn this much money, but it is still a role player salary slot. Long term, as long as it's still a role player salary slot, the deal is going to get better as time goes on from a value perspective because the cap's going to increase more and the deal is going to decrease. The flip side, and why I'm so worried about it, or why I am worried about it, and I'm not so, but is the fact that Dillon Brooks is somewhat, I'll call it mercurial.
Yeah.
He has a mercurial personality, and so he's not a known quantity like Bruce Brown is. He's not that stable. And not only personality-wise, his game as well, he is someone who has a terrible shot selection, even though he's a great defender, kind of like Marcus Smart also has a little bit of a terrible shot selection. And because of that, and because of what we lived through with Christian Wood and his shot selection and his attitude, it scares me to have a long-term deal because even though the deal gets better value-wise throughout it, if you need to get out of it early for an issue that's related to his play or to personality or because some relationship is not mendable, you can't get out of it because nobody's going to trade for that deal until it lasts 2 years left. And so it's a big commitment, and then that's why it's scary. I don't think it's bad value for the long term on a per year basis, and we'll see what Ime Udoka can do with it. That's what I wanted to get into. Now, a lot of as we just talked about, a lot of the margin of error is gone. That only really matters if you commit errors. So if we come into the season and Ime Udoka can get these guys to play, at the very least, play in level basketball and can get them to 35 wins, perhaps, or get them into a play-in game, then nobody's going to care about what just happened. It'll be just the cost of doing business, and sometimes, and being in business means that sometimes you win and sometimes you lose, and they lost on some of these deals, but they won enough to get the goal that you were trying to get to. And so, while it might look negative right now, and it could still get better and could also still get worse, we don't know what they're going to do with the extra money. The truth is, it's up to them. I called it on Twitter. I hope I'm using the expression correctly, but put up or shut up time. Now you have to, now you have to show what you're going to do with these players and these bets that you made. And if you are successful, then nobody's going to care and everybody's going to be happy, and the Rockets made the leap that they were looking for. It didn't go through the path that they expected, but they got there anyways, and that's what will matter in the end. And so you can be frustrated and you can dwell on the fact that free agency didn't go perfectly, which is what I was doing last night, the entire night. And then I woke up today and I kind of realized, hey, what's done is done. And nothing is completely lost going forward. The franchise is not doomed. We still have 6 top 10 value picks. I don't need to say the names again. We still have a great vet point guard in Fred VanVleet, perfect fit. We still have a guy that has the potential to be a great 3-and-D wing, a great on-ball defender, and an enforcer that's going to help change the culture. Now it's about putting those tools and using them correctly. And you can shift your focus from off-season mode to the fact that summer league's in a week. You can shift your focus from off-season mode to the fact that, hey, how exciting is it that for the first time in 4 years, we're actually going to go into every game trying to win. We're actually going to go into every game not caring. I mean, I'll speak from a personal level. I was going into games hoping that Jalen Green would play well, hoping that Alperen Sengun would play well, hoping that Jabari Smith would play well, rather than hoping that we'd win the game. And sometimes I'd go as far as, hey, if the shot's being taken by Garrison Matthews, there were times where I was like, please don't make the shot. That's not, there's no like multi-directional goals right now. Now there's one goal. It's win games. If it's Jalen Green making the shot, or Fred VanVleet making the shot, or Dillon Brooks making the shot, or Jock Landale making the shot, it does not matter as much as it goes, as long as it goes in, as long as we win the games. And I don't know about you guys, but I miss rooting for my team to win basketball games, and we're going to go back to that. And we have a lot of talent, and we didn't commit. Sometimes when teams that are rebuilding commit a lot of money, people say we're committing to mediocrity. We're not. We have 6 guys that should have been top 10 picks in their drafts. All of them under 22 years old. The ceiling is still through the roof. We just increased the floor a little bit. And so going into it, I'm sad because it wasn't perfect, but I'm still very, very excited to watch this team play basketball under Ime Udoka and try to win games. Like, this is what basketball is about. We're finally about to exit that stage of our rebuild. It's it's not that, but it kind of feels like when your team's going into the playoffs, and you're like, okay, now it's time. They're going to lock in. This is the important game, so let's fucking do it. That's how I'm feeling about this entire season, because the Rockets, the goal isn't to get to the playoffs. The entire regular season is our playoffs. We need to show improvement in every single one of these games, and we need to start winning every single one of these games. We won't, but we need to start trying to. So that's really exciting for me. Yeah. That's my positive message to close it out. And I'll just say one last thing, because I cannot go the entire podcast without mentioning it. It made me feel really, really good as a fan, and I'm glad they did it. As a fan, massive fan of Jeff Green, massive fan. Love this stint with us. And
he still has game too.
He's still good, right? He's still a good player.
He played a role for a championship team.
Yeah, he is a champion now. He's going to be a vet here, and I'm just really happy to see him in a Rockets jersey again. As a fan, right? No, not everything has to be analysis. As a fan, I'm really happy to have Jeff Green back as a Houston Rocket.
Yeah, absolutely. And he could fit into the backup 5 mix as well. I know he's an undersized 5, but he's filled that role in Houston before. And so you could see a situation where, I know some people, including our friend Itamar, were very concerned about, if you signed Brook Lopez, what does that mean for Alperen Sengun, since the center spot would be a timeshare? I was personally with you, Paulo, and that I was fine with that. Have that basically be breeding competition. And if Lopez is good enough that you're limiting Sengun, then that's fine. That fits with the spirit of what you're ultimately trying to do. Now, clearly, Sengun's going to be the guy, and you can sort of mix and match Landale for some of the matchups where you need a true defensive big. Jeff Green, if you have a bit more, I guess, small ball versatility, if those are things that you need, perhaps you can experiment more with Jae'Sean Tate at the 5 as well, the way they did a couple of years ago. Last year, basically a lost season for Tate due to some injuries. They have options, and who knows, maybe there's something else they do this offseason. Maybe they get back into trade talks for a Clint Capella type to fill that role externally. Maybe they do something in this window before the moratorium ends that, they can potentially expand this mega deal involving all these smaller deals and a Dillon Brooks sign and trade. maybe they end up filling a bigger name. But as it stands now, as the roster currently is, not only is Jeff Green the type of vet that you want to bring in, I think part of the rationale for moving those young guys is they want more of a balance in the locker room. Instead of having all 20 and 21-year-olds, you want to have certainly a lot of those who do have your core six, as you referenced, but you also want to have not just, say, one or two vets like a Boban and Eric Gordon for half the season. No, you want to have much more in terms of an overall balance throughout the year of guys that have been there, done that, and can learn from. And so Jeff Green, certainly he's a great guy. Everyone speaks well to his leadership, his voice in the clubhouse, but he can also play a little bit as currently constructed. He's not a bad backup plan, sort of Jock Landale, Jeff Green in tandem, and you can sort of mix and match depending on what you need in a given game. Yeah, I really like it. To me, that's a nice pivot. And again, it sort of goes with the overall theme of this episode. I think for me, if I were to grade everything that's happened in free agency and independent from the draft, I think we all agree, like the draft was an A or A plus, hands down. They just knocked that out of the park. Free agency, it's frustrating because they were so close to getting another A or A plus if they had gotten all three of their big name targets, but it's not like all is lost. They did get a lot better. They did have at least some semblance of backup plans when the obvious plan A didn't work out. And so it's frustrating because they were so close, and some of these little things, the moves at the margins, what they ended up doing with Atlanta and attaching a couple of second-round picks to move Garuba and TyTy, it's frustrating. It does take away your margin of error, your buffer a little bit, but it's not like all is lost. They still made this team a lot better. They got two of their three big targets. And so I think it's easy to be frustrated because it was so close to, checking all the boxes. But I still think overall, B minus. If you want to be really pessimistic, I think you can argue for a C plus. But there's no way you can say it's a D or an F. There's no way you can say it's a failure. I would go, I don't want to put a final grade on it yet, because some of it's going to depend on exactly how the next few days progress. What do they do with regards to the little bit that's left of their cap room? Do they potentially expand this deal? But I'd say somewhere between a B and a C plus. It's still all in all a decent off season, even if they didn't hit a home run. That's the way I'm looking at it. Paolo, any closing thoughts on your end?
Yeah, I think in a lot of people's minds, the as I said, the order of the deals created insane expectations. Before free agency even began, Brook Lopez was, someone that mostly everyone was excited about, that would, increase the floor of this team a lot. And right now, the truth is, there's a Brook Lopez sized hole in the Rockets offseason. And people are struggling to focus on everything that went right, because that's a pretty massive hole. And if the Rockets are able to go and get a guy like Clint Capella, for example, the fact that he's an ex-Rocket that everybody loves, the fact that he feels the same role, same salary, it's a very similar situation. If they go and get him, even if they have to overpay a little bit for him, I think a lot of people will jump from a C minus, C plus, C or just a C and call it an A. I think that's how there's a lot of people on the extremes of a C or that would have given it an A if we had gotten Brook Lopez. And I think while Brook Lopez is awesome, I think if you can at least fill that gap for fans, and I think for the team it makes sense as well. I'm not saying just do it for the fans, that makes no sense. But if you can fill that gap on the team as well, and you go and get someone who can give Alpi some competition and give Ime Udoka, a guy that plays defense, Jesus Christ, that's a rim protecting big, that's going to fill the void for a lot of fans, and people will actually be really excited. And if you don't, even if that doesn't happen, summer league is around the corner if they play well there. And when people get over the fact that we got dumped by Brook Lopez, and they actually start looking objectively at the team that we have and the rotation that we're going to have, excitement will start building back up. And then by the time the season begins, everybody will be happy as fuck to watch this.
And I think also, as far as again, 30,000 foot view, to spin it back to how we started this podcast, I also think when we're looking at sort of the long-term vision and the way this plays out over the next few years as the Rockets try and put together a championship puzzle, it is important for the Rockets to acknowledge, and hopefully they will. Again, they haven't made any on-the-record comments. We'll see what they say. I do think there were some mistakes made related to inexperience. This is the first time that Rafael Stone really had a ton of cap room. I know he's been on the job for 3 years, but the last couple of years they had zero financial flexibility at all. We all know they were waiting for this pivot point for so many of the bad deals, the bad money to roll off the books, most notably what was initially the Russell Westbrook contract, then the John Wall contract. This was always the first opportunity to have all that money. And I do think that maybe they were a little bit naive, assuming too much with regards to Brook Lopez. In my opinion, it was always possible, if not likely, that he was the type of guy, unlike Fred, unlike Dillon, who's attempting to leverage the Rockets. And maybe he went a little too far. Maybe he told them he was coming and then he didn't. But at the end of the day, I don't think it's unprecedented. It's happened before. And so, yeah, Rafael is a relatively new GM. This is his first time with cap room. It wasn't a total failure by any means, but yes, some things definitely went wrong, and maybe they can learn from it. I've made the point before, Tillman Fertitta has done a great job, in my opinion, the last couple of years. He's been largely patient. He's been willing to spend a certain amount of money to bring in assets in terms of these trades where they net a second round pick or two by creatively taking on certain deals. And I know that he cut costs a bit, especially the 2018 to 2019 league year. But I've said before, I think early on, things came success that is too easily. His first year was the 65 and 17 year where everything was absolutely perfect. Everything he touched turned to gold right up until Chris Paul's hamstring in game 5 against the Warriors. And so I think Tillman took it on the chin in terms of the perception, and he learned from it, and he's gotten better. And, as far as the luxury tax in particular, time will tell when the Rockets get to that point. But I think in terms of the signs that we've been able to see and deduce to this point, yeah, he has learned. He has gotten better, and there is a learning experience when it comes to being a new owner, a new GM, a new coach, whatever it may be. Keep in mind, Udoka's only been a head coach for 1 year in the NBA. There is a learning curve. It's not like, for the most part, that guys go in and instantly just hit a home run on everything they try to do. There are going to be some misses. And so I think it's important, the Rockets internally.
Just a quick correction. That doesn't happen unless your name's Jeremy Pena.
Oh God! Although I will say there's been a bit of a year 2 regression by him, but yeah, after winning ALCS and World Series MVP, yeah, you can regress all you want. You already brought the hardware that we need. Look, I think the bottom line, things didn't go perfectly, but in terms of like the super macro, I don't think this is anything fatal. I think you can be annoyed by this, you can be frustrated, but it's certainly not anything close to a failure by any means, even if there is no deal expansion or new players added the next few days. Again, there is still a way that they can leverage this cap room to their benefit leading up to the trade deadline and next offseason. There are options. But yeah, just be honest. Look back and learn from this experience and perhaps have a bit more of a blend to that philosophy in the future to where, you don't want to go back to, I suppose, the early Daryl Morey years in terms of their approach, but there are limits to, the relationship oriented approach as well. And, it did reduce overall their margin of error, maybe not catastrophically, maybe not a ton, but definitely to some extent. We can quibble over exactly how much. Yeah, I just think at the end of the day, the most important thing is just to be honest. Let's not be over the top. Let's not act like it's anything catastrophic. It's not. It was still a pretty good offseason and a really good offseason if you include the draft, which was always most important, along with the head coaching hire, which I think we're all on board with. So all in all, between Udoka, the draft, and free agency, they did some really good things. And so let's not be over the top. Let's not act like heads need to roll. No, it's nothing like that. But yeah, be honest with yourself and, let's talk about the things that went wrong. And perhaps, the next time they have these windows or something like that, then they learn from it and they're perhaps a bit more crafty in their negotiations or a bit more measured and a bit more, I suppose, just layered in terms of having backup plans to plan A and maybe not being as trusting with your top tier of targets, even if they do tell you that they're coming. I think it's just important, again, to say this within the right context because, so much of the social media reaction is just the climate we live in. People are so over the top to any negativity. And it's like, look, if you're acting like that this, even just this free agency period, let alone the offseason, was just some catastrophic blunder or failure, that it's all bad, that heads should roll, that this is just, you're just fundamentally being unserious and people are going to tune you out because they did a lot of good overall in the offseason and even a lot of good just the past 2 days in free agency. This is not all bad. I just think that discussions like ours, measured, reasonable criticisms of certain things, just be honest internally, admit where the mistakes were, And then hopefully, you learn from it in the future as, we go about the next 5, 10, 15 years and what the Rockets are hoping to turn into a sustainable contender. That's the way I'm looking at this. Just try and use this as a learning experience. Not saying you're going to have $60 million in cap space again, but you are going to have some flexibility potentially as soon as next offseason. And so hopefully, I think the way the Rockets should look at this, and we'll see over the coming days when they finally take questions and talk to the media about how everything went down, hopefully they can learn from some of these iffy experiences and improve upon them in the future. That's the way I'm choosing to look at it. I think it's healthier. I think it's also generally more accurate than a lot of the way that Twitter is acting, at least this morning. And today's going to be an interesting day because in the past hour, it looks like Twitter is finally back up. So, boy, this is going to be interesting. At least it wasn't up yesterday. That's the one silver lining as we close out this podcast, Paolo. Thank God Twitter was not fully functional when everything was going on Saturday afternoon, right?
Listen, I don't know why you're trying to flex on me. I still can't tweet shit.
Oh,
So
you can't?
I cannot. I don't know.
Holy
I'm
shit.
so today when you finish the pod, don't plug at Paulo Alves NBA, plug at Prodigy NBA, because I guess that's where I'm tweeting from now.
Oh, shit.
I don't know.
Yeah, I'm back off, so I don't know. We'll see. Maybe it just hit the reset, and so I haven't been rate limited yet. I don't know. We'll see. But yeah, if somehow Twitter is back to normal, you can follow me on there at DuBose and Paulo at Paulo Alves NBA. But yeah, we may be other places, Clutch Fans, Reddit. Of course, for me, you can read my work in RocketsWire, rocketswire.usatoday.com. We'll see. I think at some point Twitter will be back. Elon mentioned that, this rate limit stuff is temporary. He won't say it, but I think a lot of it's related to their reduction in headcount for reasons, of course, related to Elon's temperament. And they don't have the ability to fix some of the problems on the engineering side. He referred to some of the data scraping going on that they used to. And so they're sort of scrambling at the moment. But I don't think Twitter being down it's going to be anything permanent. They've said temporary. I think this is just, again, they're sort of scrambling behind the scenes in a way, the same way the Rockets were this weekend, to try and patch things up. And hopefully things are back to normal on the social media side within a few days. For me, at least, within the last 30 minutes, it's come back to normal. For Paolo, not so much, but knock on wood, hopefully we all get back to functionality soon, because boy, NBA free agency without Twitter is really weird. NBA Summer League, which starts Thursday the 7th, would be especially frustrating to not have free agency. Or actually, no, it'll be Friday the 7th. That's right, when Summer League officially kicks off, and Amin Thompson and Cam Whitmore will hit the floor in Rockets jerseys for the first time. One plug I want to throw out before we close out: for Rockets Twitter, I'm going to be throwing a 713 party with some support for the Rockets. It's officially going to be an event organized by myself and a few other people on Rockets Twitter, with support, of course, from organizations like the Logger Line, like RocketsWire. But the Rockets are going to be providing some content and some giveaways, but we're going to be doing it on Thursday, July 13th, for the Rockets Warriors game. It's the fourth that is scheduled to this point, and it's 713 day here in Houston. Of course, it ties in with the most established Houston area code. So yeah, 713 day watch party at Big City Wings, marquee location. We're going to have some graphics in the days ahead. But yeah, if you're in Houston, which unfortunately Paolo is not, but hopefully many of our listeners are, come out. I would love to chat with you guys then. That'll be the fourth game of Summer League. We know Amin Thompson and Cam Whitmore will participate, and it sounds like, at least for a portion, Jabari Smith Jr. and Tari Eason, second-year forwards, will as well. So there's going to be a lot to look forward to. And by the way, Paolo, one final little silver lining that I do think you can take out of this. I do think one reason that the Rockets were not very active with regards to undrafted free agents this year was because the Rockets were so deep in terms of young prospects. There were a lot of agents who steered their clients to other situations because it's like, how the hell are you going to play? There's such a logjam. Now that you don't have guys like Garuba, Josh Christopher, TyTy Washington from recent years, there might be some deals, be it undrafted free agents. Maybe the Rockets can trade for guys who are blocked elsewhere, but you can, over the remainder of the offseason, sort of build up your prospect stockpile a little bit, simply because agents aren't going to see this situation as capped the way they have in the past. So that's something to sort of keep your eyes peeled for. There's at least some playing opportunities that weren't there before the offloading of late. So maybe the Rockets do have some smaller moves ahead as they wrap up this offseason and get ready for, again, what should be a really fun 2023 to 24 regular season in which they're actually trying to win. But anyway, that'll do it for today's episode. We'll talk more in the days ahead. We'll be back this weekend to talk about, well, a combination of things. We'll talk about whatever happens in Summer League, first impressions of Amin Thompson and Cam Whitmore. And then we'll also, of course, reflect on whenever all of these deals are official after the moratorium. Do the Rockets add to them? What ends up happening as far as getting these deals to the finish line? Do they expand it to take advantage of the salary opportunities that are there? Do they try and roll over the space? Is there anyone else that they trade for in the interim? Again, we'll have full reaction this weekend once we get to the actual finish line and can truly grade what came in and what came out of what's, quite frankly, just a very complicated puzzle as Rafael Stone and the Rockets try and do a ton of different things with all of this cap room, about $60 million, give or take, that they had entering 2023 free agency. With that, we'll bring this episode to a close. Again, if you want more content before our next episode, the best place to hopefully get it is on Twitter. Ben DuBose is my handle. Paulo Alves NBA is where you can find Paulo in this show. The Logger Line is at the Logger Line. If you go to the Twitter bio, again, knock on wood, hopefully Twitter is up when you're listening to this, you can find our link tree, which has links to Carbach Brewing, Sports Talk 790, Rockets Wire, all of our friends, partners, and sponsors. You can access their content through the link tree, along with all of our individual distributors, Apple, Google, Spotify, so on and so forth. Wherever you want to listen to the show, you can find it at our link tree for the Logger Line. Again, for Paulo, I'm Ben. Thanks for listening, and please come back soon for another new episode of the Logger Line.